Hello everyone, I've got the privilege of being here with Kathleen Gavin, and she's got some amazing missionary adventure stories that are going to be coming out. But first of all, I'll just ask you just a little bit about your family background and how did you become a Christian?
Okay, so I probably went to church from before I was born, born into many generations of Christian upbringing. And so from a very early age, I attended Sunday school and church, and my faith was always there, but it was actually at the Billy Graham crusade in 1969 that I formally gave my life to the Lord. But I had decided that I was going to be a missionary a few years before that, so it was based on, I guess, my love of the Lord and the fact that my parents were actively involved in the church a great deal, and whenever missionaries came to speak at our country church, Mum and Dad would often host them. And so I grew up hearing stories about missionary work, and particularly in India. So at the age of 10, I decided I was going to be a missionary in India when I grew up.
Okay, so you've got this desire God's been putting into your heart because you're meeting missionaries. Then where did it go from there, and what were some of the steps you took to actually become a missionary?
That first, when I was 10, it was an essay at school. We had to write, what are you going to do when you grow up? So that's what I wrote. And a couple of years later, I saw a film made by the Leprosy Mission, and it showed work with leprosy-affected people in India. And from that point on, that was my goal, was to train as a physiotherapist and go to India with the Leprosy Mission. They didn't know about it at the time. So I went through high school, studied sciences, trained as a physiotherapist. Then I worked for a couple of years in Tauranga Hospital and went to Faith Bible College. During my time at Faith Bible College, we had a 3-month practical period, and it was arranged that time for me to actually go to a leprosy centre in India where I could see what the work was all about and be involved in the Christian life of the mission hospital. So off I went. Bye, Dad, see you in October, I said. And because my mum had died 10 years before that. But anyway, bye, Dad, see you in October. Off I went to India, and I never forget the sense of flying into Chennai, which was Madras in those days, and going in this open-sided little bus to the place I was staying the night, and the scent of frangipani trees, and it was like, this is the place God destined me to be. And so that was my introduction to being in India. Sadly, a week after I arrived there, we received a telegram to say my dad had died back home. He had motor neurone disease. And yet at the time, God used that sadness and that grief to confirm the call. I was reading through Genesis at the time, and I came to the end of chapter 11 where Abram's father dies. And I was reading the New American Standard Version, and Genesis chapter 12 verse 1 says, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, get up and go. Leave your father's house and your father's country. Go to the land that I will show you." So that was like confirmation. Now is the time to formally apply to join the leprosy mission. So when I came back to New Zealand, I did all of that. And within a year, I was actually back in India.
Can I just quickly ask you, what year did you go to Faith Bible College?
1980.
Okay, because my parents went to Faith Bible College in 1972, before I was born. Actually, they got married straight after that and then went as missionaries to the Philippines. And I went to Faith in 92, 93. So.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so what's the next part of your missions calling?
When I returned to India in 1981, I went initially to a place in South India in Andhra Pradesh where I was supposed to learn about the work and for a few months, and then go north to a hospital in West Bengal. But I ended up staying longer in the south because the physiotherapist I was supposed to be working with and learning about the work, I had to go home to Scotland sick. So you get thrown in the deep end because we were to run training courses for physiotherapy technicians, and a third of the course was finished and she had to leave. So here is me, a trainee myself, having to teach the course, but fortunately it was all ready, set up. And in those early days too, for me it was a time of learning learning about leprosy, but also learning to be involved in the Christian life of the community. Every morning in all the leprosy mission centres, you'd start with devotions, and often the patients would be present there as well. And of course I couldn't speak the language, but just to sense the presence of God and the power of prayer in those places was and the care and the compassion of people. And it made me realise that probably what drew me to work with people affected by leprosy was the fact that they were marginalised in their communities. They were people on the fringe, they were discriminated against, and just that, I guess, there was a heart of compassion towards these people. So when I finally arrived up north in a place called Purulia, I was faced for the first time in my life with living alone. When I was in Salur in the south, there were other expatriates at the hospital as well, and I shared a house with an English occupational therapist. When I arrive at Purulia, I'm the only expatriate. I live alone, and so for me it was a time of learning that I had to just depend on God. I said to one person, I said, it's probably not good to become friends with me because people I get close to either die or get moved away or I move away. And the lady said, that's fine. I want to transfer. But God was my strength through that time. The only communication form we had was writing letters. So I wrote many, many letters, and I spent hours in Bible study and just sitting on my veranda in the evenings, just talking to the Lord about being alone. And I realised that at that time I often used to say, God, it's not fair. You've taken my mum, you've taken my dad, you've brought me over here where I'm alone. And I realised after a time that I was blaming God, and that was actually sin, and that I had to repent of. It was something very, very deep that I realised, okay, maybe life's not fair, but God is always fair. And the same with people affected by leprosy. It's not fair that they are ostracised by their community, but I could come alongside them and share, especially as I learnt language gradually, that I could share that there was somebody who would never leave them, somebody they could always rely on, who would never reject them, and that was Jesus. And so I guess that's my physiotherapy was the means whereby I arrived in that work. And I just look back and I think, it's really, my story is a testimony of God's faithfulness through the good times and the hard times. And at the end of 3 years there, I came back to New Zealand for 3 months leave. The next training course was due to start in August. I came home expecting to return in August, but then the Indian government changed the visa regulations and I couldn't get a visa to carry on working in India. And I was devastated. It was the death of my dream. God, what am I supposed to do now? So after, it was probably a year, I was back in New Zealand with these questions, and the mission offered various options, but I knew that I had to know deep inside myself that wherever I ended up was where God was calling me to be, not just where the mission wanted me to be, because if I just really had learnt that if God calls you to be somewhere, he also enables you to do what you need to do there. So anyway, long story short, I ended up going to Nepal. And you know, it was even better than India. They were great years as I was able to learn the Nepali language and interact with the staff and the patients, and together with a Japanese nurse, we ran little Bible study times with a group of patients. And I should probably tell you, there were 3 in one family that came, 2 sisters, or they were cousin sisters, and the little brother of one of them. And especially the 2 sisters, I would sit with them. I was learning to read Nepali, and they could speak, of course, but they had never learnt to read. So we had these simple little Bible stories, and we'd sit there and we'd learn to read together. And those 2 girls gave their lives to the Lord. And at the time, you know, it was just so lovely. But years later, when I visited again in 2019, I was able to meet up with them again. And one of them had set up a shelter for girls who, you know, she had leprosy. She had married a man with leprosy who died, and she had set up this mission to support other young people who were in trouble. Then the other girl, she had also married one of the other patients. He had since died, but she was doing Bible studies and teaching in the church. And then even when I was there, she was telling everyone, Kathleen's the one who told me at first about Jesus. And I'm still in touch with her. And her 2 daughters recently, just in the last 12 months, her 2 daughters got married. One is now a doctor, and they're working in a mission hospital in Nepal. And the other did business studies and is living in the UK. And this was a young girl who had been cast out of her family because she had leprosy. Managed to come to the mission hospital, found the Lord, and even now, sometimes on Facebook, she posts little where she's doing a message, a Bible teaching, and that really warms my heart. I ended up in Nepal for 6.5 years. And after that, I was thinking I should come back to New Zealand and maybe update my physio qualifications. But our staff in Bangladesh heard about this and said, could you just come over and help us? Could you just help us set up a training course? 9 or 10 months, you know, then you can go back to your plan to go to New Zealand. So I thought, I can do that. So I go to Bangladesh 4.5 years later because we set up this training course, and there was another New Zealand physio came and she was to take it over. But then we realised we were training people who went back to hospitals that nobody knew what they'd been trained to do. So I stayed on and just travelled around the country, just helping with in-service education until Yeah, until I came back to New Zealand on leave one year, feeling very much that the time was coming to an end over there. If I carried on working with the leprosy mission, I would have ended up more of a consultancy role, and I'm basically a homebody, and I didn't want to be travelling and living out of a suitcase. So I came back to New Zealand with great questions. God, what next? I'm not qualified actually to do anything in New Zealand anymore. What am I supposed to do? The only other thing I ever wanted to do with my life was to be married and have a family. And, well, during that time back in New Zealand, my paths crossed coincidentally with Bruce. And after that short time when we sort of got to know each other a little bit, having known each other as children, but again, now we met up again, and I returned to Bangladesh. He said, I'm not a letter writer, but I might phone you. And God's faithfulness, the first time in all my years overseas, we had a telephone where I was living. And so I thought, oh yeah, he might. About a month later, oh, there's a phone. And he'd phoned from New Zealand, and so yeah, we had these short phone calls every so often, and then a year or so later I was due for leave, and we had a conference in Singapore. Came back from went to Singapore, and Bruce said, well, why don't I pay for you to come to New Zealand from there? So okay, I was due annual leave, so I popped back, and well, we got engaged, and the rest is history. I went back to Bangladesh, finished tying loose ends up, handing things over to others, and 6 months later came back to New Zealand, and we got married. And here we are now in Omokoroa. But yeah, really looking back over my life, I just see how, you know, I was a shy, insecure person who, when I was first told I would end up in India if I was there teaching others, being horrified of the thought, to, you know, just the growth as I said, when God calls you, he enables you. And to be surrounded by people who believe in you as well. When someone believes that you can rise to a certain level, it's amazing what you find you can actually do when you think you can't. But yeah, God is faithful.
So you've been back in New Zealand for quite a long time now.
It's 28 years.
So how's God used you also in New Zealand?
Oh, well, when we got married, Bruce said he would go to whatever church I wanted to go to, but he'd always been in the Anglican church in Raglan, and at the time we attended there, and the vicar was such a caring person, and I found in the liturgy a stillness that spoke to where I was at in my heart at the time. And so I was quite happy to stay in the Anglican church. And over time I started to be more involved. About a year after we got married, the vicar says to me, would you like to preach one Sunday? I said, yeah, I can do that. So I did. And then we gradually got more involved as a lay person in the church. And after a number of years, our vicar left, and so we went into a form of shared ministry with just a team of volunteers. So the church was encouraged to pray and discern who was being called to different roles on the team, and my name came up as being called to be ordained. And so after some local training and building on what I'd done in the past, I was ordained in the Anglican Church in 2007, and continued until we moved to Omokoroa as priest in the Anglican Church in Raglan. Initially there were 3 of us who were ordained, but gradually for various family reasons the others left, and so for the last 3 years I was there on my own with outside support. So yeah, it's to think, that when I was young I couldn't imagine speaking in public to being in the role of priest in the church. It was just, again, it's just the hand of God on the life, and being willing to do things that you think perhaps, no, I can't do that, and yet God says yes you can. Yes you can, and when I call you I'll enable you to do it. And yeah, through this time too, I've continued to be involved with the Leprosy Mission. So I'm currently still on the Leprosy Mission board. And the exciting thing is, in November this year, I'm going back to India to celebrate 150 years since the Leprosy Mission was founded. And that'll be another story.
Are you going to Bangladesh as well?
Oh yeah. Initially we're going to India. I'm going with 2 others from the Leprosy Mission New Zealand, and then the idea was to do a field visit to see one of the projects after the big 150th year celebrations. And Gillian, our country director, said, how about we go to Bangladesh on our way home? And I thought, that would be great. And then she said, well, I've never been to Nilphamari. I've been to Dhaka and Chittagong for other visits. How about we go to Nilphamari? And I thought, yes, because that's where I spent the first year of my time in Bangladesh. So we're going there to see the work and see how things have progressed. And I'm looking forward to it. Who knows? People might still recognise me 28 years later.
Maybe someone's watching today and they've got a missionary calling on their lives. And I'd just like to ask you, Kathleen, to pray for them. And maybe there's also someone out there who's single and not knowing God's will and the timing, and maybe they're feeling a bit loneliness, and maybe you can pray for them as well.
Loving God, we thank you that you have good plans for our lives and that you reveal them at the right time. Lord, I pray for any who perhaps have a calling on their heart that they've been afraid to answer. Lord, that you would give them the courage to say yes and to believe that you will enable them to do what you call them to do. Lord, for those who are on their own and long for a life partner, Lord, I pray that you would sustain them with your presence. Lord, even as you sustained me all those years, and with the knowledge that you are always with us and that we're actually not alone, even though there may not be others around us to support us, you are always there. So, Father, I do just pray for people whose hearts are called by you to whatever ministry, that you would enable and you would sustain through the power of your presence, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today, and God bless your missions trip that you're about to do to India and Bangladesh. God's peace be with you, and look forward to when you get back as well.
Thank you, and you enjoy your mission trip too.
That's right.
I'll be back before you.
Thank you.